Welcome back to Late Night at the Barcade. This is episode 8? No, I think it's episode 7. I don't know anymore. I'll tell you one thing. I've tried to record this thing 3 times now, and it's broken every single time. So I don't know what's gonna happen. I don't know if it's gonna sound robotic. I don't know if it's gonna crash. I don't know if it's not gonna actually work or it's gonna corrupt. We're just hoping for the best. And I will say, for some reason, there's an event going on at the house right next to me, so there are just people going up and down the drive who are just going to hear me swear and be vulgar. Welcome back to the show. Today we're talking about Streamer University, particularly this sort of obsession and, greed streamers have to make money and to be famous, and particularly how that stands out in this Streamer University event. We've got a lot of topic points about the people who are affected by Streamer University, how Streamer University was handled, some of the little events, and we're going to talk about where this comes from, some of the pioneers of this attitude, and talking about the future, if this continues. Welcome back to Late Night at the Barcade. I'm your host, Jhon. I forgot to say that in the start. I'm your host, Jhon, and of course, I'm brought with... That makes no sense. I have my editor, Lily, is here, as always. You may have noticed in the first introduction we had a difference in music. I'll talk about that later. So let's just get straight on into this. I know this is very up and down, and there is no real structure to this thing, but I'm hoping to have a little bit of structure further in, alright? Let's dive on in. This entire show is fucked. I want that on the record before I get into this. Anyway, Streamer University. For those who do not know, and for those who may know, need a little bit of a refreshment, Streamer University is this giant, streamer event hosted by a big streamer known as Kai Cenat. The whole idea of the event, at least on the Wikipedia page, not the Wikipedia page, but their little fucking wiki page, was to have a area where streamers could collab with one another, make a bunch of content with a, giant audience and learn a couple things to, be better streamers. There were a lot of opportunities to, have sponsors, people, uplifting one another. It's a really big event for content, for, relationships. Networking is the word I wanted to say instead of relationships. It's a really big thing, right? And this event was hosted, I think, last year or the year before. I don't really know. But it had already been hosted a couple years ago, and was semi-successful. But this time round, it's had quite the following, and has also attracted a great deal of interesting characters. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So, one of the bigger things with not Late Night Barcade, with Streamer University is that because of all of these streamers coming together, you had many different types of streamers, but with a great deal of them, great deal of many, whatever fucking word you want to say, were, these live, smaller channels who had gained popularity through, certain events. Some of them didn't. Some of them were very, very small streamers. But a lot of them came from backgrounds very similar to that of Kai Cenat, very similar to that of, Speed, if you don't know who that is. Another really big streamer. In that, a lot of their content revolved around these clippable moments, right? Scenes and events that happened within their career that, are easily shareable, easily clickable, and, for those who do not know, they're kind of like memes, right? But they are memeable moments, essentially, right? For those who do not know, think of the old Vine days, think of TikTok, stuff like that. Very easily, very small bits of content that can easily be shared around, and that uplift these people's careers, right? So a lot of the people who, came from Kai Cenat's audience, more or less, right? Very similar content creators, pushed into this space to kind of allow very easily clippable moments, right? It was a weak affair, if I'm not mistaken. Um, and because you have a lot of people who were very closely related to that of Kai Cenat's content, you had a lot of people who tried to replicate the same formula, right? Which are these very clippable moments. But what they lacked, which was the very defining thing about them, was that level of prestige, you know? I think you look at Kai Cenat and Speed, they are people who have been in the game for some time. I'm sure they might have started out as very, rambunctious, doing anything to get clips. But as they've evolved, as they've matured, and as their careers have skyrocketed, they've gained this level of prestige where the way in which they clip farm, the way in which they make content and entertain others, are very targeted and very refined, right? It's it's looking too deep into a very simplistic thing, right? I understand, but it is very important to understand the distinction between someone like Kai and the type of streamers who are trying to replicate that content, because those kind of streamers don't have the prestige. To them, and to a lot of people you'll find in streaming university, they don't have that level of time under their belt, so they're able to replicate the same kind of content, but at the expense of others, if that makes sense. And we'll get into why that's the case, right? I think one of the bigger examples of that, specifically this level of at the expense of others, came from the harassment of this, small time streamer known as Ijustlovepuzzles. The basics of her, I believe she is a elder lady who does wholesome type content. I don't believe is a live streamer. Well, not a live streamer. Sorry, a IRL. That's what they call it. IRL streamer. She does more wholesome kind of content. A lot of at the computer talking to their fans. And I was presented her content after this harassment, and I noticed she has a very, very core fan base who appreciate her. And this was, an opportunity where she was brought in, and allowed to make this content with like-minded people, right? But one of the things that happened to I Just Love Puzzles in her time at Streamer University is that many moments throughout her streams, people would try and, well, who were harassing her. One individual ran up to her door and started banging on it at the wee hours of the night, right? And I think a lot of different events, she received a lot of disrespect as she was, walking between classes, between events. A lot of people did not take her appearance here rather positively. This particular streamer knocked on her door, trying to start not a conversation, but a scene, a clip, right? To upstart a clip, rather. And, the byproduct of that is that a couple of hours later, there was a couple of scenes brought to my attention where people were discussing what was happening to her. Apparently, she, stopped going outside. She stopped going out to the dining hall to get food. She was in a very terrible situation, right? I don't blame her. You've got to imagine for a second, you are, a very, I'm not going to say fragile, but you are in a very uncomfortable situation on the get-go, right? You are this, wholesome wholesome streamer who probably has never done this kind of stuff before. And so you come into this community, this event, surrounded by those who are your peers, right? And I think there's a deal of understanding that a lot of these people are, maybe not going to relate to you on a, superficial level, but, you're going into something with like-minded individuals, right? And instead of receiving positivity, and I'm sure she did to a degree, instead of receiving a great deal of positivity, you are harassed by your colleagues, right? in a space where you should feel safe, your room, you know, in an environment which you should feel catered for, you know. She's a 60-year-old woman, maybe not 60, but like 55 to 60-year-old woman, right? You would assume that the Streamer University team behind everything would be there to support her along the way, right? And maybe to a degree, they did. But in these particular moments, they failed to do that. So you're sitting in this situation with children half your age, maybe less, right? Not saying they're children, but to, you know, the distinction between being 60 and 20 is pretty big, right? I'm not saying she's 60, she could be 55. You know, there is this giant distinction in age, this, you know, expectation, a fair expectation that of respect and, you know, like-mindedness that you would think would happen with your fellow streamers, right? And instead you're being harassed in your private home, or your private room, not home, but, you know, a place where you're supposed to feel safe, right? Um from, you know, this person who's only using you for attention and a clippable moment. Now, from what I've researched, I believe this person did apologize who was, you know, making this clip, but to, you know, it doesn't just stop here. This is not one of the only things that happened at Streaming University. You know, with this comes two issues, right? The fact that someone is willing to harass a fellow streamer for, you know, some fucking clip of theirs, right? And that there was no real support, right? I do know Kaisenet came in and did support her during this or afterwards, when it came to his attention. And I do know a lot of streamers were there to support her later on throughout that week, right? But I don't think, and we're going to get into more of this should have even happened in the first place, right? You know, I do understand the idea of Streamer University, right? It is this place for people to come together to collaborate. I don't think the intention was to put people together where harassment would happen. And if that was not the intention, where are the ramifications? This particular individual apologized 100%. I believe he was sent to detention. Now, the detention in these streams were very much another extra event. You would do something bad, you would harass a student, you would get a bunch of clips, and you would be sent to detention, which again would be a bunch of different clips. You would be interacting with Kaisenet and his team, and people would, you know, do X, Y, and Z and little punishments. The show continued going on. There were no real ramifications, right? I do believe there was a strike system in place, but to what end, right? When some of the strikes were essentially, oh, we're sending you to detention, and then we're going to give you more content. And I don't blame the streamers at this point, right? I blame how it was handled. You know, when someone is harassing another, let me tell you, they shouldn't share the same space as other people, right? What you end up creating is the byproduct of this stream and the way, or the Streamer University, and the way in which you're handling bad actors is you're creating a stream event that seems on the surface as something very hostile to the actual streamers there, right? Where the ramifications aren't there, where there are no punishments for bad acting. You just apologize for, you know, and to a degree, I think knocking on someone's door to startle them is a very minor thing, but it does get a little bit worse, right? There was another streamer at the time, I believe, called Lacy. A pretty big streamer. I think he's part of a streamer household. I'm still surprised those things actually are around still, right? But he was this streamer who had got into an accident, I believe, after an injury or something to that degree. still came to the show, to the event, right? But he came on a wheelchair. And I get to see more of his clips, and even today, I got to see more and more of these clips. But you know, throughout the entire event, because he is a bigger streamer, he was approached by many of the smaller streamers, and because he's this figure, right? People started taking the piss out of them. People were attacking him, knocking him over, stealing his wheelchair, throwing things on him, you know, being incredibly disrespectful to this bigger streamer, right? Because these individuals saw this bigger streamer as a method of making clips, right? And clips they made, right? They made a great deal, and I think there was a lot of people who were taking advantage of Lacy in this particular environment, right? Using his injuries and attacking him. And when this guy, you know, reached out about these problems, there were no support, right? From what I've seen and what I've gathered, a lot of it was like, well, it's a funny situation. There's nothing much we can do, right? The people who were attacking him and harassing him weren't given any kind of ramifications. They were allowed to go on. And, you know, it comes back to this level of prestige. You can look at it and say, well, Lacy should have reacted, right? He should have acted back. But the guy's been in the game for a long time. He's not going to react in a way and push back because there are ramifications to that, right? He can't deprave himself, you know, because he has this community. He's already done the legwork, right? And he's coming into this environment to do collaborative streaming, right? Debase is the word I wanted to use, not deprave. Debase himself. But these smaller streamers don't have that level of prestige. They can debase themselves. They can attack these streamers because really at the end of the day, there are no guidelines to stop them, right? There are no punishments to these things. The punishment is pushing them even further, right? To a point where they're more popular, right? And so they take the piss because to these people, they are presented an opportunity where they're surrounded by people they can abuse and take advantage of for attention, and there are no ramifications. The ramifications push themselves further, right? You get more attention. And so now you've created a situation where, you know, even your security are there for attention and are there to make more clips, right? I'm not saying the security themselves are going out of their way to make clips, right? But when they are, you know, I guess diffusing situations, at the end of the day, they're still giving more attention to these bad streamers. There are no ramifications here. They get sent to detention. They get their strikes, of course, right? And then they're given more attention for what they do, right? And the byproduct of that is that streamers like Ijustlovepuzzles, streamers like Lacy, and streamers like the person we're talking about, Playboymax, a little bit later, are left in this situation where they're being abused and harassed by their fellow streamers, and there's nothing they can do about that, right? Because if they react and if they fight back, you know, there is a lot more to lose than a lot of other people will lose, right? And it's such a horrible thing these people are going through. You know, there is this idea of Streamer University, and the implementation of Streamer University is very distinct from the way it was discussed, right? Streamer University, in its advertising and its main, not wiki page, but information page, kind of uplifted itself as this event for streamers to collaborate and to learn, you know, to have these teachers who were bigger streamers like Ludwig, like Valkyrie, Lizzo, Senna, Adapt, and Rage, and some other guy that I don't know. I don't know all the streamers. I'm not in the streamer world, right? But it was all of these big streamers were coming to this place to give information to their students. And I think to a degree, it's very hard to manage over 100 people to kind of properly understand that and properly take in that information. But you can look at even the classes of these particular individuals, right? And you find that a lot of people do go into it who do learn, but a good maybe 70% are using it for attention, using it for more clips, right? A lot of people go in, they, don't show up to the class because it's a funny thing, or they show up late because it's a funny thing, and they use the class for attention and for their little bits that they're doing. And some of them, see these big YouTubers, or not YouTubers, big streamers, and want to take full advantage of the fact they're there, right? It's this level of disrespect a lot of these people have because honestly, there are no ramifications and no guidelines in place. A lot of streamers were invited who did have these clipping backgrounds and these, this X, Y, and Z backgrounds, who are also being placed in the same position as these streamers who are going in here, who are these wholesome streamers, who are these different types of streamers who aren't these types of people who are looking for clips and for attention, right? So you invite these people in. You invite the I Just Love Puzzles type of people in, and you expose them to a completely different group of people without any way of, distinguishing or implementing the two groups together. And what you end up doing is you create an incredibly hostile and, poorly managed place. And I understand, right? As a streamer, it's or as a person, as a company, it's a lot harder to reel these people back together, and it's a lot harder to, plan for these things in advance. But there's no excuse. People like I Just Love Puzzles, people like Lacy, and people who we're going to talk about with Playboymax should never be exposed to this level of harassment. There is no excuse to that. And, the small streamers who are doing this, it is, you often find get very caught up in the situation, in the event itself, right? A lot of people ordinarily wouldn't do any of these clippable moments. Like, they wouldn't harass and attack each other, but they're presented with a environment where there are no ramifications for what they're doing. There are no real punishments, and most people are doing that. They're trying to get clips. They're trying to, use each other, step on one another's toes to, get attention and make money, right? And there's something very intriguing about that. There's something very, enthralling about this kind of environment to a lot of streamers because you go into it and maybe you're not someone who is looking for clips and attention, but maybe you just suddenly do a clip, right? Or you're suddenly part of a clip. You suddenly put on the mask and you're getting thousands upon thousands, sometimes millions of views because there's such a giant audience looking at Streamer University. It is a 24-hour affair. There is Kai's viewers. There are everyone's viewers. I think they said there was about 9 million people watching this fucking stream, or 9 million hours of, of streams that were watched or time that was watched. So when a streamer is presented this idea, it gnaws at them. It gets its claws into them. Because suddenly they're making thousands upon thousands of dollars, and the idea of debasing yourself suddenly becomes a lot more accessible and a lot more acceptable, right? Because you are being surrounded by people doing the same thing and being rewarded for doing that, right? And the unintended byproduct of that is that people are being hurt. I mean, a good example, and I brought it up many times now, we're going to get into it, is this harassment from some streamer against the streamer Playboymax. Playboymax, seemed to be a very positive part of Streamer University. And I think although he was someone who was clipping at a lot of times, there was a lot more, respect and care that this streamer put in to everything else. I don't believe he went out of his way to kind of ruin classes. I know he went out of his way to do clips at times, but as a streamer, that is kind of what you do. But the distinction between Playboymax in this particular moment was how he was treated by his fellow streamers. I think a lot of the stream at the time in question, the one we're going to discuss, was very positive. He had a lot of people who were very nice to him and who were actually collaborating for some really great moments, and I think he was one of the highlights of Streamer University. But towards the end of his stream, and this is running out into maybe 7, 8 p.m. In wherever they were. So towards the end of the night, Playboymax is approached by another streamer. The streamer himself decides to, he says, "Oh, hey, Max, can I talk to you? X, Y, and Z." And, the guy's not going to tell him to fuck off, right? And as soon as he lets him, Playboymax allows this streamer to talk to him. The streamer just goes off on him, talking about how, his sexuality was ambiguous and how that was a bad thing, how this tattoo he had that apparently said Diva was an affront to God, essentially trying to break down the character of Playboymax. This idea of how this guy was saying, well, you're fake, X, Y, and Z, this is an affront to God. You have to be more like yourself, be a man, because your children down the line are going to be embarrassed by what you've become. Incredibly fucking disrespectful crap coming out of the mouth of this guy. But, Playboymax was very much affected by it, right? He leaves after allowing this streamer to have this conversation, and he breaks down, right? And rightly so. This guy was terrible to, Playboymax at the time. I'm just going to call him Max, right? And you've got to look at the perspective of Max here. You have had this entire day filled with really great people, right, who are collaborating with you. You've got a friend that you've been making who is making a lot of great content and is actively, a very good part of your time here. You're making a lot of, a lot of great moments, and you're doing very well. And towards the end of it, you are approached by this guy. You do not know who he is, right? Who's now saying to you that you are innately disgusting and an affront to God, right? Saying how, oh, he doesn't give a shit that he gets bad attention. He could be hated for the rest of his life. He's got to say this point, And I think Playboymax really turned this into such a positive kind of message towards the end. And the show, again, is not to turn, it's not to kind of talk mainly about the streamers and what they're up to. It's not a news show. But I think it's very important to talk about, Max and how he reacted to this. He did have this really great message towards the end of his stream about, accepting your sexuality, believing in yourself, and not allowing people like this to, demean you, right? And he took the time off, and I, to a degree, he was given a lot of support. I know Kai himself came to this streamer and, supported him. And I know a lot of streamers were very supportive afterwards. But, and look, to a degree, I don't know what happened to this other streamer. This guy, I did this, and I don't think he got off scot-free. I do believe there were ramifications, but this should never have happened in the first place, right? This guy decided to come up to a fellow streamer and, for whatever reasons he believed was the right reason, he decided to debase himself and put down another streamer for his message, for his goal, for, attention. Although he, disregards that being a factor, this other streamer still went out of his way to put down another person, right? You know, I think when you have all these different streamers with, backgrounds of negativity, I don't know if it's a great idea to bring them in a giant space together, right? To allow these people to, harass and attack each other. This guy shouldn't have a platform, right? These people who go around harassing each other and pulling everyone down for content and for, this, for a content for money shouldn't be allowed in these environments, right? They shouldn't be punished in quotation marks to then get more views and more attention, right? Um and I think there's a really big lack of, security and protection against a lot of this. And I think this is where the conversation branches out, right? You know, you have these streamers who are going to watch this. You have a giant fan base who are now watching Streamer University. And what they're seeing are these terrible people. What they're noticing are people who are ready to debase themselves for attention, to gain attention rather, to gain views, to gain money. And this is highlighting this space as an entirely very negative thing, right? I think Streamer University will probably be successful, whenever it comes out again, right? But this event has highlighted such a negative part of streaming that I think it's really going to have a negative impact on the community as a whole, you know. There will be those who will be inspired by the words of, Ludwig and, Senna and all the other big streamers who genuinely gave a lot of great advice, right? But there will be many who will look at Streamer University and see it as a example of what streaming is like, you know? I think a lot of people are really going to benefit from this, and a lot of people will fail, and a lot of people will lose the traction they have gained. But, it's really highlighted this as such a negative thing. Because of my research, I have also taken, I've seen a lot of people discussing Streamer University and the way in which it has affected their viewpoint on streaming as a whole. A lot of people are coming out of this and having such a negative view on streamers. And why wouldn't they? They're presented with this giant event where people are being highlighted, who are doing these outrageous things for attention. People are getting harassed, bullied, like Playboymax, harassed, attacked, bullied, and put down for the sake of content and attention, and there are no ramifications. These people still have platforms. These people may have been shunned. I think a couple of them probably were shunned, but many weren't. Many got away. I mean, there was, scenes of people throwing fucking, hot sauce on each other, throwing bottles, destroying property, vandalizing. This impression people are going to have is going to be so negative. And streamers who are wanting to get into this game, many of them are going to see this as an example of what to do in the future, right? People look at what is successful and they see it as a means to follow, to also gain that success. I mean, to a degree, that is why these streamers debase themselves, because in their mind they are being rewarded, and in truth they are being rewarded, and they are gaining thousands upon thousands of dollars to debase themselves, to harass others, and they are making money out of it, and there are no ramifications, you know. I mean, you could say to a degree the ramification will come down the line as they lose that following, but a lot of people will use this as an opportunity to push their content, right? They may start off as a very negative person, right? Harassing each other, but a lot of people are going to turn that into something else, right? I mean, people have been doing that for time in memoriam. You look at YouTubers, they're synonymous for doing that, right? You look at Logan Paul and Jake Paul and Rice Gum and all of them, and we'll talk about them soon, right? But people are going to see this as a very easy way of making money, and they're going to continue this. And we're going to see a giant wave, a greater wave, potentially, than we have seen in such a long time. Because these people aren't being punished for what they're doing. People aren't criticizing those who are doing wrong anymore. There are still those who do, right? But in these kind of environments, there aren't people saying, well, this is wrong. We have to take away the platforms of these people. People doing wrong get away with it, and a lot of people are starting to think they can. Many won't. Many will be punished. Many will lose their following. But that's not going to stop a giant wave of people who are going to continue doing this, you know? And I think Ludwig, he brings up a wonderful point during one of his classes that he had. He said, and this is not in quotes, but something along the lines of, if you are here to make money, to make millions, there are easier ways of making money, and this is the wrong way to do it. And I entirely agree, but as it stands, people are making millions. Well, not millions, but thousands, hundreds of thousands off this content, and that's not going to stop them. They're going to continue to do that. People are going to take what they've learned from Streamer University and this clipping stuff, and they're going to try and apply that to real life. And you're going to find, the Ice Poseidons of the world, the fucking, not saying Ice Poseidon's a bad guy, but like the idea of, debasing yourself in public for attention, for clips, what have you. They're going to find themselves quickly doing these things for attention, expanding that into real life and becoming genuine nuisances. And some people are going to try and change that, move their comment, pivot their content to something else, There are no ramifications. There aren't a lot of people who are criticizing the negative parts of Streamer University, right? And look, I'm not going to say everything's negative. There's a lot of positivity to Streamer University. I think the teachers were wonderful. Their messages were really important. And myself, I've learned a lot, right? I've been very inspired by Ludwig's comments. And some of the things Valkyrie said. It is, you're never too old to learn. You're never too young to try, right? And I think there's so much positivity with Streamer University. It is important to understand that. With Playboymax, there is so much. His message was wonderful. The way in which people supported each other in these smaller groups were wonderful. But a lot of people aren't going to see that. And that is the bigger issue, right? A lot of streamers have found themselves, who have joined Streamer University, have found themselves uplifted by, harassing fellow streamers, And look, I think, a lot of people, Ludwig brings this up, how, look, you may find success in the meantime, but down the road is when you're going to lose it. I think that's going to be true, but that's not going to stop people, It's not going to stop these younger streamers. It won't stop these streamers who have already debased themselves for attention and are now being rewarded, right? And look, this whole idea of, this desire for fame and glory has been around for time in memoriam. There's a very famous statistic, that was done years and years and years ago. How, I think it was in the 90s or 80s, the most, children's most desired job to do in the future, or career in the future, was being an astronaut. And then I think it changed to being an actor. And then it changed to being a YouTuber. And now you're finding in the newer generation, people want to be streamers. Young people are desiring these jobs more and more. And I think when they're presented these giant events such as Streamer University, it changes their outlook, and it's turning them into future streamers who are going to be these people who are going to push down others for clips and are probably going to be rewarded for it. We're losing through the implementation of events like this, not the planned desire of the event, but the implementation and the overall outlook people have towards these events are going to create more of these negative streamers, and we're going to find a lot less streamers who are these humble people, who are these people who do positive content, who positively add to the community. Because you'll look, eventually Ludwig will retire. Eventually Kaisenet will retire. Eventually Speed will retire. And what will be left? Will it be great streamers, or will it be these streamers who are willing to debase others for attention? One can only find out, but I'm sincerely hoping it's the latter. I think that's what it means. I'm sincerely hoping that it doesn't become the ones who are bad. You get what I mean. But this has been a thing since time immemorial. I mean, one of the greater examples, and I think some of the biggest things where this was presented and uplifted, was through Vine. For those who do not know what Vine is, it's essentially, it was like the first ever iteration of TikTok, right? Vine was turned into Musical.ly, and then Musical.ly was turned into TikTok. Very simple, right? That was the pipeline. And so when Vine was removed, and when Musical.ly was removed and turned into TikTok eventually, a lot of people came from these, highly, clippable fucking things where everyone was doing quick, quick hyper content that was doing very well. They were then pushed away and were sent out to a world where all they had was Twitch and all they had was YouTube. And at the time, most people only had YouTube, as Twitch was a lot smaller back then. And it was a lot more of a gamble on Twitch than it is now, right? So these people came to YouTube, and with them came their content, and with them came their audience, right? And people like Jake Paul, people like Logan Paul, people like Ricegum did very well. A lot of people didn't do well. But what they succeeded at doing was, bringing with them this idea of, clippable moments. Every second had to be something hyper. They had to kind of be nuisances because it was stuff that children enjoyed, right? And it created a gold standard for content that had, for views and attention, that so many people followed. I mean, you look at the streamer world now, a lot of streamers who are these people who do things for clips and attention came from these communities and probably grew up watching the Logan Paul types, watching the Rice Gums of the world, right? Because it worked for them, because they grew up as children watching this content and watching their heroes, their idols do well. And when in practice, when in execution, they did well too. I think during 2016, when Logan was getting very popular, Logan Paul, Rice Gum, there were a lot of criticism at the time. But at no point were these people punished for what they were doing. you know? Not that Logan Paul did a lot of wrong. He did do some things such as, you know, filming a dead body, which may or may not have been faked. Who knows, right? But it was this idea where, you know, Logan Paul goes into Japan and harasses a bunch of store clerks for attention, saying, "Oh, this is a maverick thing," right? And kids and impressionable adults watch that content because it worked. And when it came to Twitch, it worked too. You know, when this behavior is something that has now ingratiated itself in the younger generation. And I think we're starting to see the ramifications of that. We're starting to see more and more streamers, you know, debasing themselves, attacking each other, harassing each other because it works. And unfortunately, there's not enough people who are doing things like this show talking about how fucking stupid they are, right? These people aren't being punished. You know, larger streamers, and I'm not, you know, campaigning for larger streamers to do things, but, you know, there aren't a lot of streamers who are going against and saying, hey, this was wrong. This should have been changed, right? Because it was wrong. Because these things should have been different, but they weren't. And we're, you know, and I've said it and said it a couple of times, and I genuinely do believe this. We're gonna start seeing some very scary trends of more and more of these clippable streamers, and I think a lot of people are gonna lose that prestige that Speed and, you know, or I Show Speed and Kaisenat have, where although they do a lot of things for clips and make a lot of attention, a lot of waves of attention, right? There is that level of, you know, prestige where there is stuff that they won't do. They won't harass people. They will add to scenes. They'll uplift others because they know what they're doing. Because people aren't being educated in the right things to do by the right kind of people. Instead, they're seeing these people who are doing it wrong, these people who are pushing down others, they're seeing them do well, they're gonna replicate it. And although, you know, people will be, you know, serious and will be justifiably say, well, this is not a good way of making money and it's not a quick way of making money, it's not an efficient or, you know, streamlined way of making money, people are still gonna do it because it's intoxicating, because there's fame, there's fortune, and it's easy for a child to see this as the way to get there. And for many, it's a lot easier. You know, you do see a lot of actors and a lot of voice actors who go into streaming, who go into YouTube and content creation because it is a way to achieve the fame they desire, right? Or to achieve the, you know, the appreciation they desire for their work, right? And I think we're going to find a great deal of people who are doing it for the wrong reasons, who are going to be these negative streamers. I think we need more people who campaign against this. We need more people out there criticizing these bad behaviors, because the people who have criticized, you know, who used to criticize these things are getting older. You know, as commentary YouTubers get towards their 30s and 40s, as streamers get towards their 30s and 40s, they've stopped talking about the generation before them, right? And the generation that's before that generation. And because we're lacking people nowadays who are really sitting down and saying, this is fucked up, you need to change your behavior, people are getting away with this. You know, and there may be a small group of people, but they are the minority now. And we need more people to campaign against this bad behavior. We need ramifications for harassment. You know, people need to contact Twitch. People need to talk to Twitch. People need to, you know, educate themselves more. Subscribe to those who are criticizing others to, you know, to hopefully change the minds and hearts of those who are being influenced by those who are pushing people down for attention. Let me break down a hypothetical for you, right? You're a small time streamer. you've been streaming for about 3 years now, right? You've got a very core fan base. You know, maybe you get about 15 views a stream, but you more or less know everyone you're streaming with. You know people by their names now, their gamer tags, and you've very recently created a Discord for these viewers to see your content, right? And you are this, you're not a commentary YouTuber, but you're very much this desktop wholesome YouTuber who, plays Minecraft, plays friend games, talks about, mentality and your life. It's just, you're just chatting wholesome streamer. And that's where you've come from. That's your roots. And one day you hear about Streamer University. And it was a funny ordeal. Your stream was talking about it, and you said, look, if I get one follower, if I beat this Mario race and I beat this guy who's at number 1, I'll sign up for Streamer University. You did it for a joke, You didn't expect to get in. There's thousands upon thousands of people who wanted to get in, and you didn't think it was going to be you. But for the fun of it, it sounded like a great idea. Being surrounded by like-minded streamers, hearing the name, being, in the vicinity of people like Kaisenat, people like Ludwig, people like Valkyrie who do similar content, it's felt like a dream. And one day, you get accepted. Your chat's a miss. They are the happiest they've ever been. This small joke turned out to be a one-way ticket to your future. You see this now, collaborating with bigger streamers, maybe even like small streamers like yourself, right? And you see opportunities of making friends, learning some really great things, and perhaps, and at the back of your mind, maybe it's a little bit of a fever dream, but maybe making friends with these bigger streamers. It's a dream of yours. You've had a very hard life so far. The economy's been really rough, and you're making ends meet very slowly, paycheck to paycheck through your streaming, and this seems like your golden way to improve your standing so far. In the back of your mind, you do know you're going to meet some very, not hostile people, but very different people from you. And you're going to have to adjust to that, and it's going to be hard, but you have your viewers with you. You have your core fan base, and you're ready to do this. So Kai sends over, the flight details. He pays for your flight. He gives you all of this streaming equipment, and he sends you off to this amazing university. You're surrounded by like-minded people. You're roomed up with someone who does very similar content, and you're having a great time. You're already talking about collaborating, and you pull up your stream for the first time. And surprisingly, you have a couple hundred people watching. Your little community is growing, very small at this point, but it's slowly growing. It's growing to degrees you've never seen it before. So you go to these classes, you stream yourself for the first time. Your fans have hardly seen your face, but now they have, And so you're here. You're here now. You're for the first time doing this IRL stream. You're having such a great time, and the first day is wonderful. And then the second day rolls by. And you're doing it all again. It's such a wonderful time. You're having, a breakfast. You're having lunches catered to you. You're interacting with really cool people. And then one day, as you're walking to Ludwig's class, you get knocked over, pushed into the floor by someone you have no idea who it is. You turn around, you dust yourself off, and you look up to this streamer, and they're pointing a camera at you. They're laughing. They're having fun. They're pointing at you. They try to pick you up, and you're a little, you're a little startled. You're a little scared at this point. You didn't expect this to happen. And it's a very embarrassing thing. And then you look at your chat. Maybe it takes a couple of hours after the scenario. They apologize. You say it's okay. And maybe it's a couple hours later. You see in your chat thousands upon thousands of people are watching. And a part of you, is a little taken aback by it. You didn't realize that there was so much to be gained from this. There are a lot of people who are supporting you, who are very supportive. There are a lot of people who are laughing at you, right? And it's this very strange kind of feeling you're getting now, where you've got all of this attention, but it's so different. And then you have someone send over a subscription. They send over a $50 donation. This is the most money you've ever made in a single stream. And they're asking you to do more. They're telling you to do more things. And in your mind, you're being, manipulated to do these things. But the money's coming in, and suddenly it doesn't seem so bad to do something a little silly. So after the class ends, you make some jokes in front of some other streamers. You make them a little uncomfortable, right? It's your first time doing it, and it goes really well. Everyone's really happy. You're doing these jokes you've never done before, and your viewers are enjoying it. You're getting more and more attention. And it's enthralling. You can see yourself now that, hey, look, that other first scene I did was terrible, but now I'm making people happy. I'm making people smile. And you're starting to form this small little group. You're getting thousands upon thousands of more views. Your audience is getting larger and larger. Your Discord is swarmed with new viewers. But what you don't realize is that your original followers are starting to feel very alienated in their own community. But at the back of your mind, it doesn't really matter now. There are too many people in chat. There are too many things going on. And you're being invited to more and more events. And so the night goes on. 2 days go by. You're gaining hundreds of thousands of people. Clippable moments are happening on your TikTok. You have your clipper going overtime. You're going semi-famous on Twitter, semi-famous on TikTok, and your YouTube shorts are doing so very well. And then one day, you go a little too far. You end up being the one pushing over another streamer. He's a bigger streamer this time. You push him over, you make fun of him. You do pick him up and you laugh it off. But and in this moment, you look at your chat and you see how popular you have become. Thousands upon thousands of people now. You're climbing into the hundreds of thousands of people watching your stream. They love it. You are making more money than you have ever made before. And a part of you shifts. A part of you changes. The idea of debasing yourself becomes a little bit more acceptable. And the people around you are egging you on, and they're doing the same thing. So you start attacking others. You start putting people down, and you're making thousands upon thousands upon thousands. You're being sent to this detention, and because you're in detention with Kaisenat himself, you have found yourself in the millions of viewers. You are making so much money, you are becoming a completely different person. And on your way back home, you've come out of it with thousands upon thousands of viewers. Your Discord is so very large. And you get home. You tell your viewers on the plane, I'll see you in a couple of days. And you come home, you open up the stream to 100,000 viewers waiting to see you perform again. And what you realize so very quickly is that you're unable to perform anymore. You lack, or this this environment that was catered to you is gone. You're now at home, and when you've tried to go out, a part of you has stopped yourself, because if you are to do the same things you did in the streamer university, you'd be arrested. You'd be, your career would be destroyed. And so you default back to the content you are used to making. And people don't want that. It takes weeks. It takes some time, but slowly you find yourself losing these thousands of viewers. They're not here for the clips. Well, they were here for the clips. They're not here for the content you're producing right now. And so as you go from hundreds of thousands to 1,000 to 100 to 15, you think back to yourself, where did my fan base go? What went wrong? And you look at your Discord and no one's there anymore. And you look at your chat and it's 15 people who hardly know you. And it's dwindling day by day. Well, eventually, you've lost so many streamers you don't want to do it anymore. Your fan base that was there before things turned out the way it was have left. Your couple of weeks in the spotlight has gone, and suddenly people don't remember you anymore. And suddenly you're left all alone with no fan base, with no one left to care, all alone on your stream. And that's the unfortunate truth for a lot of people. But let me wrap this up. If you are someone who has viewed this streamer university and you have a platform or are wanting to make a platform to talk about your opinions on it, for the love of God, please do. We need more people talking about streamer university. We need more people campaigning against bad streamers. And if you're someone who's come out of this streamer university and you've made a lot of money and you've made a lot of, views, right? Don't stop yourself, but pivot yourself. Don't make the content stuff where you are putting down others. You can go and do clip farming moments. Of course you can. But please pivot yourself to something that doesn't harass others. Because it is possible. Kaisenat does that. Speed does that. And you can do it too. And if you're someone who has viewed Streamer University and you want to follow the guidelines that were set before you, this gold standard of attention for fame and views, take a step back and understand why you want to do this. And if this is truly what you want to do, don't. Or do it in a way that doesn't hurt others. Because you can find success of Twitch. You can find success of YouTube. But this is not the way to do it. Hurting others is never a way to make money. And you should never allow this greed of yours to influence your decision. Because it's only going to get you hurt. And it's only going to hurt others. This has been Late Night at the Barcade, episode 7, I think. Thank you all for watching. I know there wasn't a lot of tangents in this little episode, but I wanted to be very serious with what I was talking about. I wanted to get everything done, and I'm really hoping that all of this audio sounds crisp and great. As I said before, you may have noticed that some of the music in the outro and intro are a little bit different this time around. Well, we've got some music made by Jippy, who I've decided to use for today's episode because I think it would sound a little bit nicer. And hey, maybe I'll continue it. We'll see what happens. If you want to get in touch at at latenightbarcade@gmail.com. That's latenightbarcade@gmail.com. If you've got more to add to this story, maybe I was wrong with some of the things I said. Maybe you want to send over some hate mail and tell me how I'm wrong. Please do. I genuinely want to hear what you have to say. I'm not going to bring all of it up on the podcast at all. I just want to hear what you have to say. That's latenightbarcade@gmail.com. Thank you all for watching. This has been Late Night at the Barcade, Episode 7. Thank you all for watching. I've been your host, Jhon, and as I always say, be bold, be brave, stay beautiful, people. Good night.